Was there ever a time that you had a crisis of faith where you questioned your belief in God?
Sure. And I would less call it a crisis of faith than an ongoing question of faith, which I think is, I hope, most religious people. You know, the word Israel, right, in Hebrew, Yisrael, means to struggle with God. That's literally what the word means. And so the idea of struggling with God, right, or if you're Jewish, you're B'nai Yisrael, right, the idea of struggling with God, I think, is endemic to the human condition. If you understand what God's doing, then I think you're wrong. And if you think that question doesn't matter, then I think you're also wrong. I think that God is a very necessary hypothesis.
So the struggle with God is life. That is the process of life.
That's right. Because you're never going to get to that answer. Otherwise, you're God and you aren't. So
why does God allow cruelty and suffering in the world? One of the tough questions.
So we're going deep here. There's two types of cruelty and suffering. So if we're talking about human cruelty and suffering, because God does not intervene to prevent people from exercising their free will, because to do so would be to deprive human beings of the choice that makes them human. Right? This is the sin of the Garden of Eden, basically, is that God could make you an angel, in which case you wouldn't have the choice to do the wrong thing. But so long as we are going to allow for cause and effect in a universe shaped by your choice, cruelty and evil are going to exist. And then there's the question of just the natural cruelty and vicissitudes of life. And the answer there is, I think that God obscures himself. I think that if God were to appear in all of his glory to people on a regular basis, I think that would make faith, you wouldn't need it. There'd be no such thing as faith, right? It would just be reality, right? Nobody has to prove to you that the sun rises every day. But if God is to allow us the choice to believe in him, which is the ultimate choice from a religious point of view, then he's going to have to obscure himself behind tragedy and horror and all those other things. I mean, this is a fairly well-known Kabbalistic concept called Tzimtzum in Judaism, which is the idea that when God created the universe, he sort of withdrew in order to make space for all of these things to happen.
So God doesn't have an instrumental perspective on liberty.
In a chief sense, he does, because the best use of liberty is going to be belief in him. And you can misuse your liberty, right? There will be consequences if you believe in an afterlife, or if you believe in sort of a generalized, better version of life led by faith, then liberty does have a purpose. But he also believes that you have to give people, from a cosmic perspective, the liberty to do wrong without threatening all the institutions of society. I mean, that's why it does say in the Bible that if man sheds blood, by man shall his blood be shed, right? There are punishments that are in biblical thought for doing things that are wrong.
So for a human being who lacks the faith in God, so if you're an atheist, can you still be a good person?
Of course, 100%. And there are a lot of religious people who are crappy people.
How do we understand that tension?
Well, from a religious perspective, what you would say is that it is perfectly plausible to live in accordance with a set of rules that don't damage other people without believing in God. You just might be understanding the reason for doing that wrong, is what a religious person would say. This is the conversation, again, that I had with Sam, basically, is you and I agree. I said this to Sam. You and I agree on nearly everything when it comes to morality. Like, we probably disagree on 15 to 20% of things. The other 80% is because you grew up in a Judeo-Christian society, and so do I, and we grew up 10 miles from each other, around the turn of the millennium. So there's that. So you can perfectly well be an atheist living a good, moral, decent life, because you can live a good, moral, decent life with regard to other people without believing in God. I don't think you can build a society on that, because I think that, that relies on the sort of goodness of mankind, natural goodness of mankind. I don't believe in the natural goodness of mankind.
You don't?
No. I believe that man is created both sinful and with the capacity for sin and the capacity for good.
But if you let them be on their own, doesn't it
without social institutions to shape them, I think that's very likely to go poorly.
Oh, interesting. Well, we came to something we disagree on, but that that might reflect itself in our approach to Twitter as well. I think if humans are left on their own, they tend towards good. They definitely have the capacity for good and evil, but when left on their own, I tend to believe they're good.
I think they might be good with limits. What I mean by that is that what the evidence, I think, tends to show is that human beings are quite tribal. So what you'll end up with is people who are good with their immediate family and maybe their immediate neighbors, and then when they're threatened by an outside tribe, then they kill everyone, which is sort of the history of civilization in the pre-civilizational era, which was a very violent time. Pre-civilizational era was quite violent.